Welcome to the Chiefs. The Chiefs is a Whiteark podcast aimed at specifically giving you an insight into what makes great leaders and entrepreneurs in a variety of organisations tick. We call them Chiefs. My name is James Ciuffetelli, and together with my Whiteark co-chief, Joe Hands, we're going to attempt to take you on a journey and talk to as many chiefs across as many industries as we can to give you an insight into A, what makes them tick, and B, what makes their enterprises thrive, and more importantly, what they've learnt along the way. The Chiefs. Welcome to another edition of The Chiefs, and this morning we've got a really special guest and member of the team who's joined us. So Matty Webber, welcome.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me here today, and it's great to be part of the team.
You know what, I probably should say early, it's Matthew Webber. So, Matty, I apologise up front, but it's fantastic to have you here with us and a part of the team and part of the Whiteark family.
I think the Matthew or the Matty, it sort of depends whether I'm in trouble or not, right? So if it's, I normally get the Matthew and the middle name by my mother and sometimes my wife when I'm in trouble, but Matt or Matty's absolutely fine.
All right, so let's start. Matthew Webber, welcome to the Chiefs. You're in trouble, so I've opened up with your mother and Cal's address of you. So fantastic to have you. So the Chiefs is all about, getting an insight into what makes great entrepreneurs tick. And we're really fortunate today because we're talking to you obviously as a chief and an entrepreneur, but also as a part of the Whiteark family. So welcome to Whiteark first and foremost, Matty.
Thank you. It's a real privilege to be part of the team. I've been watching what you guys have been doing for quite a while, and having the ability to make meaningful change is certainly something that I looking forward to be involved with. So
Matt's got, for those of our listeners who are dancing right at this moment onto LinkedIn, having a look at Matt's bio, Matt's got an amazing story and level of experience across transformation, supply chain. He's worked in private equity, commercial finance. So it's feeling like the Whiteark team's got more and more of a finance skew to it. Most recently, an author, an acclaimed author. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But without a doubt, an entrepreneur at multiple levels. His experience runs from organisations such as Target, Kmart, globally, by the way. He actually ran the Target operations, head of operations for Target, which is an amazing role. Stanford, accredited and trained. This guy's done it all. So, Matty, my first question to you, and it's my first question to every chief, is what's your story?
It's a good question. It's sort of, I'm sitting on this side of the table this time. Normally I'm asking the question, so it is a bit different to tell your own story, but I guess in the context of business and entrepreneurship and the like, my dad had a small transport business growing up, and I was one of those kids that was just fascinated by business from a very early age. And I had the lemonade stand. I was running around the neighbourhood, sort of mowing everyone's lawns, and even when I had a paper round, I did 2 paper rounds, not just one, because I was quite enterprising and somewhat of a bit of a misfit, I guess, in my family circles from that perspective. But definitely, Dad had his business, and my uncles and so forth also had theirs, so I certainly had the taste for it. As life progressed and went on to university, I was sort of the later part of high school, I was sort of that stage where it could have went one way or the other for me, but I really knuckled down into education, and education's a massive value of mine now because I see the opportunities that it presents and provides people. And, I've got had a very close friend that did choose another path, and he's actually no longer with us. So that it just shows the shades of how different it can go. So education for me is really important. Ended up starting my career as an accountant, as a bean counter. So I was in finance, and when I started the career, I thought accounting was business, right? So I was more interested in the business. I was less interested in doing all the spreadsheets and so forth. But also it was a great discipline to learn, and I spent the next 10 years trying to get out of accounting. So, but it was such a great foundation. And learning the fundamentals of business from that perspective, and that flows through into everything I do now about making sure everything's commercial and making sure that we can actually be profitable and build value. But I was always fascinated by change. I have been from throughout my whole career, and went from National Foods, and I was in their finance department there, and then when Wesfarmers acquired the Coles Group, I joined the group then and went into the Kmart business, and that was probably when things really kicked off. We're talking about a department store that had made essentially bankrupt and made no money for 10 years, and I was part of the transformation team there and got to work in the supply chain. First from a commercial perspective, then leading a bunch of, there was a whole network consolidation of their domestic supply chain. And then that went on into effectively running what was called the Last 50 Metres program, which was looking about how the stores operated themselves and then working all the way back upstream, all the way to source to affect a great factory to customer outcome. And then I went on to head up the international team for Kmart. So it's interesting because if I look at my father or my grandfather, it's one job, one industry type thing. And I've sort of had many industries. So I've done finance, supply chain, transformation, and across a number of businesses as well. And then, so now I've been working with multiple organisations globally, helping them with their supply chain and transformations. And you mentioned the Stanford thing, so education continues. So I'm a lifelong learner, and I continue with that. So went on to Stanford, and currently doing a master's in design futures.
Wow! Well, I tell you what a story! It's I could pick any one of a number of spots to start, but I am going to go back to. It's clear to me, and I've known Matt have had the good fortune of knowing Matt for a long time. Your dad and his transport business,
yep,
and what have you, obviously had a big impact on your entrepreneurial spirit, right? I'd love to explore that a little bit. If we were to sort of go back to, I don't know, your childhood or your youth and where that sort of entrepreneurial flair was coming, what were the things that inspired you through Dad?
That's a brilliant question. I think one of the things that I love about business and what I was inspired by Dad was that you could actually affect impact or change. And Dad many of his trucks were refrigerated vehicles, so they used to deliver a lot of goods to supermarkets, chickens, beef, all of that sort of thing. But, when I'd go away with Dad in the truck, he'd be talking about supply chain, and not supply chain in the context that we talk about it today, but we're talking back 30 years ago.
He'd be living it. He'd be actually doing the supply chain.
He was, and from the source. So we'd go to the abattoirs, and then we'd move the meat, and then we'd be at the butcher. And so it would go all the way through. But Dad spoke about how important not only is transport to the Australian economy, but how important it is to be able to, or how special it is to be able to put food on the plates of everyday Australians. And I think for me, I was fascinated by the ability to impact other people's lives through business. And, so for me, there was always that romantic notion of being able to affect change. But I think just the natural part of problem solving as well always came through. My brothers they followed Dad in terms of what's interesting actually is I did everything not to be in transport, mind you. That's why I went and got educated, or I thought I was. But my brothers, for instance, my oldest brother is a diesel mechanic and so forth. And I was never that way inclined, but I certainly connected with the stories of business that Dad spoke about, and I was always trying to unpick how to do it. And he had some friends that were quite successful as well. So, I hung around them.
I just think there's so much value in that. Again, your dad's obviously had a big role in shaping you and your values, and credit to him, but credit to you for being that lifelong learner to take that on. But I love the analogy that you gave just in terms of your dad taught you the ability that you can affect change in whatever you do. And you talk about your dad living the supply chain and the experience of driving from the abattoirs to the butchers, and then and then making sure that whole value stream. We talk about walking the line. You talk about your experience later in life with Wesfarmers in the last 50 metres. I reckon your dad taught you about sort of that last 50 metres day in, day out. So what an amazing lesson. I wonder, my next question to you is, I wonder whether in corporations and in business people do enough of that walking of the line in terms of sitting in the shoes, from the customer back to where it all started, because we often see that they don't we, Matty?
They don't, and it's quite often missed, particularly in big organisations. So when I did join big organisations, I found it quite peculiar that a lot of people would be working from the, I guess, the ivory tower. And again, if I go back to my upbringing, the way things were done, you walked and lived and breathed it. And I'll give you a small example of that. The fuel tanks had to be full to get from X to, to get to A to B, and the truck needed to be full, so they needed to be utilised. Otherwise, you're not sweating the asset. And it's only when you're actually in the truck driving it or unloading it or doing whatever it is, but being part of it, that you truly understand the metrics, and you can put and the impact and the meaning of it. So you can have a spreadsheet in the office and it can tell you about utilisation and it can tell you about fuel efficiency and all of those sorts of things. But unless you actually live and breathe it, it's very hard to connect with what's actually happening. And I think there needs to be a solid connection between the data and the information, as well as a practical insight, and walking in the shoes of the operators or your customers and understanding what the real problems are. And because it's only when you understand the real problems from the perspective of who you're solving it for that can you actually solve for it. Otherwise, you're solving for problems that actually don't exist, and are probably going to make things worse for people.
I love that analogy. I actually love the analogy that you just gave then. And it wasn't with disrespect. It was actually absolutely with maximum respect, because something we both got in common is that we come from personal family heritage in as much as our fathers and parents ran businesses. And obviously we learned some good stuff and probably some bad stuff, I'm sure, along the way. But I remember my first analogy, walking into one of my first corporate gigs and thinking, you called it the ivory tower, I called it what does everybody do here? Like, there's just people everywhere. And I remember going, excuse me, Matt, what do you do? Oh, I'm the customer service officer. Oh, great. What customers do you? I don't actually talk to customers. I do this part of okay, great. And what do you do? And I'm in finance and I look after procurement. Okay, great. Where do you relate? And people had no idea of that value stream. So I love your analogy around, that first experience. You walk in, the ivory tower, it's the James Ciuffetelli, what does everybody do moment. How do you then impact change in that sense to encourage people to go back and get closer to the problems? Can you give us an example of how you might have done that, what you saw work,
First I'd like to say that most people go to work with the intent of doing a good
100%,
job. 100%.
Agree.
And they don't know what they don't know. Each and every time, for me, it comes down to having a very strong strategic direction and having set values and being, and of course the leadership helping the teams understand why it is what they do is important, and giving every opportunity for the team members to become connected with the customer. My time at Kmart under, with the likes of Guy Russo, David Matheson and Ian Bailey, and they gave the opportunity for you to get to as close to the customer as possible, but they were very, very clear about the strategy and who will actually serving. And if you were having a conversation with someone that wasn't connected with the customer or didn't understand why they were doing it, in actual fact, there were times when the leadership or the executive actually said, "Stop doing it and see what happens." And if it didn't impact the customer, then stop it, because you're just moving widgets or doing things that actually don't add value. And that was where I learned a very important lesson, that it's the customer that defines value, not the business. But getting people as close to what the customer's understanding of that value is as possible. And the other thing that's really important here, if you take, for example, a retail setting or a logistics business, is it doesn't matter whether it's somebody in accounts payable, in finance, or a business analyst or planner, getting them out into the environment as well is absolutely critical, so they can actually see what's actually happening at the coalface and understanding what the real issues are and what the real needs are as well.
I love your connection there, Matty, to leadership, right? So you gave us a really good example around the leadership actually drawing an absolute connection to the customer and to the problem that you were solving. So the leadership obviously very clear on what the strategy and the mission is, really, really clear. Really clear. But I also love the fact that they're leaning in, encouraging everybody to jump on board that value stream and get involved, but also really clear around, hey, when it's not working, as a leader, we need to make a call to stop this and pivot to the next thing. How would you describe leadership in the context of, we just come out of COVID, or we're still in COVID, but the world's kind of, I hate using the term the new normal, but I don't think there's ever been a greater time for leaders to step up and lead the chase. You know, COVID drove everybody correctly back to retreat and look after their people. But we've probably never seen businesses, and we're seeing it, as you know, Matt, better than anybody. In Whiteark, we're seeing customers who are disconnected from the businesses that serve them because we've retreated to homes, we're all on Zoom, but we're disconnected. So what role do you think leadership can play now moving forward in creating whatever the world needs to be now?
Yeah, for me, leadership is everything. So, you know, I keep coming back to any transformation needs to start and end with leadership. I think the point is we've always been in a state of transformation or state of disruption, I guess. It's just accelerating even more. But what it tells me more so today than it has ever before is about how much we do need to be connected with our people. And I think one of the problems that we have in leadership is that top-down. For many organisations, it's very hierarchical and, you know, top-down approach. But the great leaders are the ones that are actually working for their teams, and they're actually, yes, they're influencing the strategy and setting that and being very clear and setting extremely good example. But it's the people that are with the customer, it's the people that are servicing the customer that need support, and this is where we as leaders need to be able to support those people, and we work for them, not the other way around.
It's a whole concept of servant leadership.
It's absolutely servant leadership, but it's also about being respectful to those people as well, because they're the people that will have the great ideas. They're the people that will have the connections and the relationships with the customer. So there's no better person to be able to get the ideas from. And so what I've seen work really well is, of course, yes, there needs to be direction, but there needs to be empowerment, and there needs to be empowerment for people to work and to express their ideas in a constructive way and be able to try different things or express different things and not have that fear hanging over them that if they try something and they get it wrong, that they'll be, I guess, disciplined for it. Good example would be, for instance, I don't know, like a hotel chain at the moment. I can't remember which one it is, but they absolutely give their frontline staff the power to resolve a customer dispute there and then, pay out cash or upgrade the room or whatever it might be. And, and it's about making sure that people are empowered to be able to make decisions on sensible decisions on the way through.
Love it. Empowering your people to actually make calls, real customer service. Now, it's a slight change of tact, Matty, but Francis Ford Coppola decided, he had nothing better to do, so he wrote a book, and then before you knew it, Godfather 1, 2, 3 were classics. Is there something you want to tell me? Are you going to start Godfather 4?
Not quite, but I...
So you're an author,
yeah,
an acclaimed author. Tell us, I'd love to know what motivated you to write Fit for Disruption. It's a great read for those of our listeners who haven't had it. Reach out to us and we'll get a signed edition to you from our very own Whiteark man. Talk to us.
Yeah, I think for me, James, it was one of those things. I've been, and this goes back to the childhood, I guess, is that I do want to leave a legacy and I do want to be able to impact, and it gets back to that story about, that you can impact people in small ways by what you do. And, I just felt I had a number of experiences that had helped change people's lives. And if I look at some of the transformations I've been involved in, and yes, they've commercially helped businesses survive, but it's also created employment opportunities. It's made for happier working places. It's provided for Mary's bike for Christmas. There's some really wonderful things that come out for that. And I just wanted to share, and I've worked in environments, I'll be honest, it hasn't always been successful, right? So I've learned from my failures as I have as much by the successes I've had. And I've worked with some wonderful leaders, and again, that concept of leadership comes up again. And I've also worked with some
wonderful leaders,
with areas of opportunity. And one of the things I found is also that in business we can overcomplicate things as well. And I just wanted to sort of pen down some perspectives I had around what makes a really, really successful transformation, and do that in a way that is simple and easy to read and almost as a guidebook that anyone could do. But the actual process of writing was wonderful, and I'll continue writing. So, I'll write a number of books, so there will be a series. It won't necessarily be fit for disruption, but it's a great process. It's nothing more vulnerable though than putting your thoughts out there on paper and publish. It was one of the most fulfilling exercises that I've done, and a learning as well.
I think it's a great example of you, but it's also it gives us a great insight into you, Matt, from the perspective that I found it a wonderful, practical read. I sat there and could really, because you're really generous with the tools that you put forward, really generous with the learnings and the philosophies. But I think it's a great guide for anyone who wants to do something, right? Yeah, people often think, we should be disrupting all the time. That's change, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I see go wrong with transformations is, it's very often good about creating a very fancy PowerPoint deck and it's all very theoretical and whatever. And what I wanted to bring out in the book was a very practical way of doing it and of being able to affect transformation. And it's principle based. It's not you must do X, Y, and Z in this order at the exact same time. They are principles that if you follow the principles, you're generally going to get through okay.
Looking back, right, so you're an entrepreneur. Here you are. I know you're only 23, 24 years of age, but 30 plus years experience, a whole variety of industries. What was something that you wished you'd known in the early days that obviously through experience and what have you know now? What advice would you give a young Matt Webber?
Yeah, it's interesting because it comes back to the book, right? And I was chatting to a very close friend of mine, and and some of the messages that are in the book were actually probably advice to myself. So things like be bold and making sure that being comfortable with the uncomfortable and just having a go. A lot of the time we can procrastinate on ideas and I've probably got, we talk about entrepreneurship and I've probably had, some of the best ideas in the world, and I should be a billionaire, many times over. Well, not quite. But
he's only a billionaire 7 times over, guys.
But it's not about money or the impact or whatever it might be. But ideas are only ideas unless they're done. And then being able to just have a go and just trust yourself. Don't wait for the perfect answer. Just follow your heart, and if something feels right, it probably will be right. And if you get it wrong, that's okay too, because it's all learning and you'll build on that. And I think what we do have a problem with today, and if I think about in my younger days, I was scared to fail. I was scared to let people down, and I was scared for my career. I had a young family. I started my family when I was quite young.
The consequence was high, right?
It was very high.
Mouths to feed and kids depending on you.
Absolutely. I had 4 children and my brother, young brother living with me. And I was only 29 at the stage. So
23 now.
yeah. I'm going backwards. But the point being is, I was scared to have a go. But I had so much value to give. And if I could talk to my 20-year-old self or whatever it might be, would be it's okay, you weren't going to fail anyway in the grand scheme of things, and just stick to your values and follow your heart and just live it to its fullest, and everything will generally be okay anyway.
I love that honesty around, you were scared, and we're all scared, and I think the hardest thing is to lean in on that and say it's okay. But you're really leaning on that, and that becomes the energy that propels you forward. And I love those of you listening. I've obviously had the great fortune of knowing Matty for many, many years, but this whole analogy of just lean in and have a go, learn. It's okay to fail, as long as you kind of, as my dad would say, don't make the same mistake again. Otherwise, you're a D-head. But
yeah, when I was that young kid going around doing the paper rounds, doing the lemonade stand, I even at the back of my dad's ute started a mechanic business, and I had no idea what I was doing. But it's that sense of, I wish I never lost that. Just that bravery, just to try something different. And like, if you take that little mechanic business that I had as a complete disaster, but I tried and I realised it's not for me, and that's okay. But we lose that as we get older, James, and I think we need to really work hard as individuals to keep hold of that. But as leaders, we need to really help our people hold on to that and hold on to that belief and be able to, I guess, to bring out their best in themselves.
I love your constant reference back to leadership and people, and it's obviously 2 core values that you live day in, day out. You don't need to sort of wear them as a badge of honour. As a leader, a people leader, Matt, what advice besides money would you give to people leaders to motivate people?
Yeah, motivation's a really interesting concept. If you're getting out of bed doing something that you believe in, you don't need a lot of motivation. And that comes back to leadership and it comes back to values. So the biggest advice to do there is, first of all, do what you love what you do. And I know there's practicalities around that. You can't. It's not a perfect world. But equally for leaders and organisations, you need to make sure you bring people that have a value set that is, and one of those values may be being commercial. One of it might being innovative, or it might having a sense of purpose to society as a whole. Whatever it might be. If you have, for instance, a purpose-led business and you're just bringing commercial animals, that's not going to work from a values perspective, and it will clash. But to the motivation, best thing a leader can do is to make sure that you create an environment where values can be lived and breathed, and that starts with attracting the right people in the first place.
I think it's a great analogy, and you talk about living and breathing. There's a book, Everything I learned at kindergarten, and there's a line in that book, and it's a book that was written for young teenagers, right? But there's a line in that book that basically says, and it's in reference to a classroom, but it basically says that fear not that they're always watching. From the context of the teacher. And your reference here just made me remember that very simple read. But the very simple learning is, as a leader, it's not often not about the role clarity or the jobs to be done. It's exactly, they're always watching. So as a leader, you've got a responsibility to lead, right? It's okay to be vulnerable, because in all of that, they're watching, they're learning, they're growing, and you're walking the line together.
Absolutely, and providing that safe environment and together is always better than alone, James. And the leadership concept is sometimes just listening to what someone's concerns are. It could be just people just want to be held, and people want to feel like they belong to something. It's natural human behaviour.
Matty, we could talk for 4 hours. I promised you 20 minutes, and we've gone half an hour. So I've got two last questions. Second last question is, so amazing journey, started early days, great learnings from Dad that have really carried you through. Obviously strong connection to family and people, run so many operations around the globe at so many different levels, transform. And here you are now, a principal at Whiteark. Talk to us about Whiteark. Now, you've got the white hair like me, so we've got the white covered. We're going to have to go and do a woodwork course to build the ark together. What are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to work with a number of organisations, James, as we work through all these disruptions. It's a really challenging time for many, and again, it gets back to some of the values or things that really excited me when I was younger. Was about being, if we're able to help organisations succeed, we can create opportunities, we can create jobs, we can help society. And I know that sounds almost like romantic notions, but for me, the Whiteark, I love, and it's on the front page of the brochure, it's what Whiteark stands for, and it's about making meaningful change. And I want to make meaningful change and change that lasts, not just change that's temporary, but change that allows organisations, leaders, people to be comfortable with the uncomfortable as we go forward, and to take the most of the opportunities. And generally in times like this where things are hard, it's actually where the most opportunities present. And so my excitement is teaming up with some great people like yourself and Joe, and being able to to deliver opportunity, James.
Ditto. I'm really looking forward to imparting some of your amazing skills, competencies and knowledge on clients that we get the privilege to work together on and for. So Matthew Webber, one final question, and I ask this to every chief. One word that sums you up.
Values.
Ooh, I've never had that. Values. I love it. I thought he was going to say ice or cool or sexy or something like that. But they're words that I'd use on Matty. But anyway, Matty, values, I love. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Chiefs. Even greater pleasure to have you as part of the Whiteark team. Really looking forward to having fun together. Sorry, Cal. And, really helping small businesses and all businesses thrive.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me.
Good on you, Matty.